Hello, everyone, and welcome to the European Voices podcast. I am Vedrana from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in the upcoming episodes, as you know, I will be your host. The idea of this podcast is to show the stories of young, successful activists in civil society and in politics who come from different countries from the Western Balkans, but also from the EU countries, from the European Union. This project is implemented with the IRI Generation Democracy Network, Europe region members with the support of NED. I am welcome to have today as my guest Omar Memišević from Breza, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Omar, welcome.
Thank you, Vedrana. I'm really happy to be here.
At the beginning, since I'm also coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina, tell me three words that best describe Bosnia, by your opinion.
Oftentimes, those are the most difficult questions. I'll have to say, first and foremost, very beautiful, but at the same time, very challenging and very complex. So beautiful, challenging, and complex.
That's really true. And that's actually very interesting because lots of people from the Western Balkans country describe their countries as challenging. So I think there is something very familiar to the Western Balkans country, right. Former ex-Yugoslavian, actually. Great. But tell us more about Omar. I mean, I know a lot about you, but can you tell me more about yourself, more about your background, your education, and what you do for a living right now?
Well, first of all, thank you for starting a podcast that really allows for youth voices, not just in the Balkans or Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also in Europe to actually be heard. And I thank the IRI and the Generation Democracy Network for an opportunity like this. As you know, I'm Omar Memišević. I'm 26 years old. As of a month ago, I'm 26. I graduated in international relations and diplomacy at the University of Sarajevo with my BA degree. And currently I'm in the process of writing my MA thesis on the University of Sarajevo, focusing mostly on foreign malign influence in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Western Balkans. I come from Breza, which is a very small town, some 20 kilometers from Sarajevo. Besides all that, I just came back from Washington, D.C., where I was a congressional fellow in the U.S. House of Representatives, which was a really interesting experience. But over the last couple of years, I've been heavily involved in political activism here in Bosnia. I have worked with several domestic and international NGOs here, focusing mostly on either foreign policy or youth wings of the political parties and democratic capacity building within those parties.
Excellent. You mentioned your activism here in Bosnia. Can you tell me a little bit more about reasons why did you decide to get involved in politics?
Well, politics as, how do I say this in English? Not as a trade, but as a sort of a sociological phenomenon, has always been interesting to me. Those are one of the main reasons why I enrolled in political science studies here in the Faculty of Political Science here in Sarajevo. So that was a really good starting point for working something related to that. And as you know, politics in Bosnia is very challenging. I don't have to tell you that. And naturally, I was sort of, how do I say this? I was attracted to that sort of work. And I have to say that I really found myself there.
I think that's something very familiar to when you live in Balkans, especially in Bosnia, and you need to get involved in politics. Otherwise, politics will be.
Politics gets involved in.
Yeah, that's it. You mentioned also that you were a few months ago. I mean, you just came from the United States. You were in DC at your on a fellowship, but also you were in Strasbourg on internship in the Council of Europe. What kind of experience can you share with me today from Strasbourg from one side and from the DC from other side? Because it's everything is related and connected to for first activism, and the second foreign policy?
Well, honestly, both of those experiences were so beautiful. Coming from the Western Balkans, we somehow like to underestimate ourselves, thinking, oh, why would somebody? And I think I told you this on one of our meetings. Why would somebody accept me in the Council of Europe or in the U.S. Congress coming from Bosnia when they could, accept somebody from France or Germany? Well, it turns out that they accept a lot of people from the Western Balkans, which is for me personally very very beautiful and very refreshing at the same time. Working for the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, I was a trainee in their Directorate for Political Affairs and External Relations, and it was interesting from several perspectives. First of all, the historical point in time when I first came to Strasbourg was really fascinating. The war in Ukraine has just started. There are countless elections happening in Serbia. It was the election year in Bosnia as well. There were several more. I think presidential elections in France, parliamentary elections in France, etc. So from that point, it was really interesting. The second point is that the things that I did as part of that traineeship were really interesting. It was mostly political affairs, but the areas of focus were elections, were human rights, especially in the Western Balkans and the Caucasus. The Caucasus, for me personally, was always very interesting since, just like the Western Balkans, it's a melting point of cultures, histories, various different narratives, religions, if you will. So I find it really interesting from that perspective. The experience in DC was shorter than the Council of Europe, but it was, on one hand, it was more concrete. The fellowship is called Tom Lantos Congressional Fellowship, and it's a 3-month fellowship as opposed to 5 months traineeship in the Council of Europe. And the way we're placed is within the offices, the Washington, D.C. offices of elected members of Congress, mostly House of Representatives. And the jobs we do were basically more concrete than my experience in the Council of Europe, because in the Council of Europe, you would look at the big picture, what's happening in the Western Balkans or what's happening in the Caucasus. In the U.S. House of Representatives, it was more case study based. For instance, I would examine what's happening with the implementation of the Abraham Accords in the MENA region and Israel, as opposed to just looking at various aspects of relationships within the Middle East. I would look at this concrete issue of international law. It was also the case with international law and carbon removal technology, something that I also did for the office. So if I have to compare those two, it was both were very interesting. Both were honestly very beautiful for me personally. The DC experience was a little bit more concrete, but if I can steal a little bit more of the time,
of course,
probably the best part of the entire experience of working in Strasbourg and working in Washington DC wasn't the fact that you're doing foreign policy or that you're doing political affairs or stuff like that. It was the everyday experience of Washington DC and Strasbourg. It was for those people who are listening to this and who have been to Washington DC and have been to the U.S. Capitol building, they're gonna know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the tunnels you have underneath the office buildings of the Senate and of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Capitol building. Probably one of the best experiences was actually such a small thing, but I found it really beautiful. I was actually walking from the Capitol building towards the Washington Monument, and from there to Constitution Gardens. After which I walked to Lincoln Memorial, and MLK Memorial, and then at the end Thomas Jefferson Memorial. And it's one of those everyday things, that are found really beautiful. Besides the fact that, at the end of the day, you are working in the U.S. Congress, one of the greatest deliberative bodies in world politics, and that carries a weight of its own, if you will.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, especially when it comes to DC. I've got the opportunity to visit Washington, DC this year, but also last year. And it's a really beautiful experience just to be there as a visitor from a tourism part, but also when you got the opportunity like you to work inside, to be inside these processes. I think that kind of experience is something that there is has no values. Actually, it's very doesn't want to say it has no values, but it's so much more this kind of experience, being engaged into the processes in Congress building. Actually, you mentioned earlier that young people from Bosnia doesn't know how much they can make, not just here in Bosnia, in the Balkans, but also worldwide. And that you're like impressed that you get in to be in the Council of Europe, and then to be to DC, and to actually that foreign citizens and foreign institutes are actually, they values more young people in general and people from the Western Balkans than to our institutions here. Can you maybe compare how it's maybe easier for you to find that kind of internship and fellowship outside of the Western Balkans, outside of the Bosnia, or here in Bosnia? Because you're on your master studies and you have an opportunity to have different kinds of internships. Was it easier to get in outside of your country, that kind of job, fellowship or internship, or it's easier to be here?
Well, it's a little bit more difficult when you're into foreign policy. I know that during the main part of my studies, during the BA, when we had all the lectures and all the exams and all that, one of the things that was often talked about as lacking during the studies is actually the field experience. And getting that in Bosnia is very difficult if you're studying international relations and diplomacy or anything related to foreign policy, because the entire Western Balkans region is lacking very strong think tanks like the ones that we have in Central Europe, or like the ones that we have in Western, or for the fact, I think that almost 2/3 of world think tanks are in the US.
Yeah,
so I think that speaks volumes when it comes to that. So, but the funny thing is that once you get in, it's really difficult to get out.
Yeah.
Because and I think you would agree from the political capacity building side here in Bosnia, because you get, I think that happened last year. I applied for 2 things at the same time. One was Council of Europe, the other one was European Parliament. And I was thinking, okay, I don't think I'll get either, but I'll try. Well, it turns out that I got shortlisted for one, and I got the other one.
Yeah.
And at that point, all those opportunities sort of, come to you by themselves. Everybody's sending you this or that. You suddenly you get an opportunity to apply for, something in the US or anywhere in Europe, or in some instances, Middle East, which, first of all, I find very fascinating from a strictly networking standpoint. But besides that, from a professional standpoint, what can be better than working, if you're into foreign policy, what can be better than going to the heart of it? In my case, that's DC.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because I think that in general, young people, not just from the Balkans, but in general around the world, they don't use any kinds of opportunities. I mean, there is so much opportunities, but people needs to find a way to reach them and to relax and have so much like confidence to apply, because lots of young people in general doesn't have so much confidence, especially when it comes to the foreign policy, as I can say. And I think that is something that we in general needs to do in the upcoming years, to build a youth capacity to apply for something and to support them to apply, to get not just engage and evolve, but just to using any kind of opportunities that they can get. When it comes to young people, again, you were part of many political schools here in Bosnia, and that kind of informal education. Can you tell us a little bit more about your perspective of young people in Bosnia specifically?
Well, to be quite honest, those political schools, and generally speaking, political and democratic capacity building, helped me a lot to, at one point, be bold enough to actually apply somewhere. I was the one, who was underestimating myself, thinking, you're never gonna get in. Why apply in the first place? But those things, and I'm going to name a few examples that I think you would agree as well. Advanced Leadership in Politics Institute, School of Political Studies of the Council of Europe, definitely. And several of those really helped you from various different aspects, from the networking, from the policy building, policy writing standpoint, from hard skills, soft skills, you name it. It really helps you. But my main, to get back at what you said before your last question, my main issue is that a lot of young people don't really, and that's the way I see it, you don't have to necessarily agree, don't really want to try something new in that segment. I remember when I was still a BA student in Sarajevo, I don't think that maybe 2 or 3 students from my generation wanted to go on a foreign exchange somewhere. And I had actually two friends who went to Paris for a semester through Erasmus Plus programs. And I was really sorry that they were the only 2 ones that actually went somewhere. And that's during the BA studies. That does not include all the programs that you have in Bosnia. And I think it's the same logic applies internally in Bosnia, that we don't really like to go out of our comfort zone. And this is not related to, this can be, but at the same time doesn't have to be related to politics or civic activism or anything else. It can be related to businesses. It can be related to your education. It can be related to basically anything. The fact is that we don't like to get out of our comfort zone.
Completely understand you, and I love the point that actually young people, not just young people, but people in general, they like to be in the comfort zones. They like to be in the safe zones when it comes to any kinds of change. But in the democracies like Bosnia and in the Western Balkans, we need to go out of our comfort zone, because out of our comfort zone is our changes for ourselves as an individual, but also for the country, because we are in the EU path. And I really hope, and I know that we need to go out of our comfort zone and take some serious positive changes here when it comes to politics, political system, political practice, practicing democracy, and everything else. We are unfortunately running out of time, but to wrap up this great conversation, what would be your advice to the young people in the Balkans, in the Europe region, and worldwide?
One of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was at the end of my BA studies, when one of the professors at our university, since you graduated from the same institution, said, and I can't really quote him, but I will paraphrase. He said, travel as much as you can for just one single reason, and that reason is so that you can see how little people think of the Balkans. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean that they don't think about the Balkans because we're not at the center of European geopolitical thought, if you will. And somehow we're always geographically, somewhere just outside of the map, not exactly, in the middle of it. And I think I really try to utilize that advice to the best of my abilities.
Completely. I agree with you, and that's a really great message to everyone listening this, because Generation Democracy is a really global network, and we have more than 3,000 different people from the 6 regions of the world. And thanks to Generation Democracy, we got the opportunity not just to travel, but also to work with young people, young activists in civil society, in politics. We got the opportunity to share our experiences, share our successful stories, but also not so successful, to exchange opinions about not just foreign policy, but about our everyday life. Because young people, no matter where they come from, we all have same or similar everyday issue, especially in countries like Western Balkans, like Latin America, like from Africa region, and some parts of the Asia region, MENA region. I think it's very important to use that our possibilities and our opportunities to connect and engage with people, to not just to travel, but also to meet other cultures, and to learn more about the world, because world is not just where we live. World is everyone that's outside. Actually,
I remember one of the things.
Yeah.
Sorry, please.
Yeah. No, continue.
I remember one of the things when I first came to Strasbourg, and I was thinking, and that was always my first question. Like, I know what kind of a country I grew up in, and I was always thinking, okay, how did other young people grow up? What were their sort of, talking points for their childhood and adolescence? And one thing that I found out in France is that basically the same things. Basically the same existential things. What kind of a high school am I going to? Am I facing any problems there with the grades, with other students? Then what kind of university I want to study? What do I want to study? When I finish that, okay, when do I get a job? Where do I get a job? How long is it? How much paid is it? And all that. And it's really basically the same thing that our generation has to live through in the Balkans and in Western Europe and in the MENA region, or I mentioned Caucasus in the beginning. So basically, we have all the same problems.
Yeah. That's, I think, one of the best powerful things that we can actually work together, because we have like the same or similar issues, but also we have that kinds of ability to work to create better our local community, our country, our region. And I found it very important that the networking and connecting with different people from different regions, different countries, can make amazing things, amazing positive things, not just for ourselves, but also for the, I can say, whole world. Omar, thank you so much for the opportunity and finding time to have this conversation and record this podcast with me. It was a pleasure having you as a guest, as always. Thanks everyone for listening. Generation Democracy, IORI and Ed, for supporting this, and make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook as Generation Democracy, and subscribe to our channel for more upcoming episodes. Thank you.